wind that scoured the rooftops of Vienna had a name, a local moniker whispered by old women in the markets and muttered by cabbies waiting for fares. The Helm. It was a high-altitude beast, a scalpel of pure alpine malice born in the frozen peaks west of the city. It didn't just blow. It descended, a predatory presence that howled down the concrete canyons of the boulevards. Carrying the metallic tang of distant snow and the closer, grittier smells of diesel exhaust and roasting chestnuts from the Ringstrasse below. It was an insidious, interrogator's wind that found every seam in your clothing, every microscopic gap between glove and cuff, and drove the cold deep into your marrow until it felt like your bones were humming a funeral dirge. Alec Thorne felt it not as a sensation, but as an entity, a malevolent force trying to pry his numb fingers from his rifle and hurl him into the 7-story abyss of the Kärntnerstrasse. He lay prone on the gritty asphalt shingles, a thin, crystalline layer of hoarfrost crunching like broken glass under his Gore-Tex-clad weight. The polymer stock of the rifle pressed a numb, bloodless spot into his cheekbone, a familiar point of contact in an alien landscape. It had begun its life as an Accuracy International L-96A1, the venerable British sniper system. But it had been so heavily and bizarrely modified by the obsessive artisans in Q Branch's subterranean workshops that its original designers would have wept with a mixture of horror and admiration. Its official designation was SAR-7, the Silent Ascent Rifle. The traditional 7.62mm rifled barrel had been replaced with a wider, smooth-bore launch tube. Its purpose not ballistic, but ballistic in the literal sense of throwing something. The scope was a Schmidt & Bender 5 to 25 times 56 PM2, a piece of optical engineering so precise it felt less like looking through glass and more like teleporting your eyeball 60 meters across the street into someone else's life. Clipped to its objective lens was a L3 Harris AN/PAS-13 thermal imager, which painted the world in ghostly shades of heat and cold, feeding a live, shimmering picture to a ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook beside him. The world through its lens was a Hieronymus Bosch painting of temperature differentials. The warm, phantom shapes of cars gliding below, the hot pinpricks of exhaust vents, and the cold, dead voids of darkened windows. Tonight's projectile wasn't a bullet of lead and brass. It was a delicate, cruel-looking thing of carbon fiber and titanium. A grappling hook with a magnetoreological tip. A marvel of material science designed to clamp onto stone with less sound than a settling snowflake. Spooled in a canister behind it was 200 meters of whisper-thin monofilament line. A single strand of synthetic spider silk no thicker than a human hair, yet capable of supporting twice his body weight. The propellant was not gunpowder, but a single, near-silent, and utterly untraceable canister of compressed nitrogen. The whole assembly was an elegant solution to an impossible problem, a testament to British ingenuity and a complete disregard for fiscal sanity. A few feet to his left, Anya Sharma, cocooned in a similar thermal oversuit, made a minute adjustment to a dial on a Telinga Pro X parabolic microphone aimed at their target. Her face, framed by the frost-rimmed fur of her hood, was illuminated by the faint, eerie green phosphorescence of an oscilloscope display. Her breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a tiny, fleeting ghost swallowed by the helm. She was the mission's sensory cortex, its ears and its electronic nose, sniffing the radio spectrum for the faintest whiff of trouble. Internal comms are cycling standard encryption on the 433.92 MHz ISM band, she murmured, her voice a low vibration that the wind snatched away almost as soon as it was spoken. Thorne heard it perfectly through his bone conduction earpiece, a subtle buzz against his jawbone. It's sloppy. That frequency is a public sewer, crowded with garage door openers, baby monitors, and cheap walkie-talkies. They're arrogant. No alert status. Volkov is keeping to his routine like a Swiss watch. Thorne didn't reply. His world had shrunk to two glowing rectangles, the thermal view on the tablet and the magnified optical view through the scope. He was watching the window. 4th floor, east face. The SVR Residentura, the nerve center of Russia's foreign intelligence service for all of Central Europe, masquerading with laughable transparency as the office of the Russian cultural attaché. It was a stone fortress of secrets in a city built on them. A brutalist gray block of granite and paranoia squatting amidst the Baroque elegance of the diplomatic quarter. The glass in that window was triple-paned, ballistic-rated, and laced with a spider web of hair-thin sensor filaments. The frames contained vibration detectors so sensitive they could pick up a moth fluttering against the pane. Behind that glass, a laser grid, invisible to the naked eye, mapped the room in a three-dimensional web of instant, silent alarm. Yet, for precisely 11 minutes every night, between 23:47 and 23:58, one of those windows was cracked open. Not by more than a centimeter, a tiny vertical slit of opportunity, but it was enough. It was a flaw, a single, exquisite, exploitable flaw in an otherwise impregnable fortress. It wasn't born of incompetence, but of a uniquely Soviet blend of bureaucratic penny-pinching and the personal arrogance of one man. The building's ancient, state-run HVAC system, a relic of the Brezhnev era, couldn't cope with the immense heat bleed from the server farm on the floor below. And Colonel Valentin Volkov, a creature of precise, unyielding habit and a dinosaur from the Andropov School of Espionage, liked the air in his personal office to be a constant 18 degrees Celsius. He was also a chain smoker of Sobrany black Russian cigarettes, their cloying, heavy smoke a personal signature. Without that sliver of ventilation, the air in his sanctum would become oppressive even for him, fogging his thoughts and staining his icons. A soft, chittering sound, muffled by insulation, came from the heated carrier a few inches from Thorne's head. He shifted his weight with a sniper's economy of motion, reaching over to unzip it just enough to slide his gloved hand inside. Small, leathery fingers immediately gripped his own. The grip was surprisingly strong, a desperate, trusting anchor in the vast, uncaring cold. "Easy, Finch," Thorne whispered, the words a puff of condensation in front of his face. He stroked the soft, dense fur on the capuchin monkey's head. The animal shivered, but not from the cold. It was anticipation, a nervous energy Thorne knew all too well. Almost time to go to work. The entire operation, codenamed Chimney Sweep, felt like a fever dream conjured by a madman. It was a plan born from the ashes of MI6's most catastrophic failure in a generation. 6 months ago, Network Nocturne, the service's entire intelligence-gathering apparatus in Eastern Europe, had been systematically dismantled with surgical precision. 12 assets had been executed, their deaths staged as muggings, car accidents, or sordid gangland killings. 3 more, including the station chief in Prague, a man named Miles Kendrick, with whom Thorne had shared a bottle of Lagavulin and a long, drunken conversation about the failures of fatherhood only a year prior, had simply vanished, presumably into the lightless interrogation cells of the Lubyanka. The source of the hemorrhage, the digital Judas, had been traced back to this very building, to the meticulous, almost pathologically neat records kept by its resident spy master, Colonel Volkov. Volkov didn't trust the digital domain. He was an old-school Chekist who believed in the tangible trinity of paper, ink, and a very large, very heavy Austrian-made safe. The prize, the holy grail of this insane endeavor, was a single red leather ledger. Intelligence gleaned from a terrified, low-level clerk who had been turned and subsequently exfiltrated at immense cost, suggested that in this ledger, Volkov kept a handwritten list. Every compromised agent, every payment schedule, every dead-drop location. But more importantly, it was believed to contain the identity of the high-level mole inside the Western Alliance, the source of the rot, the one who had sold them all out. Getting that ledger wasn't just about damage assessment. It was about the survival of the service. Every conventional option had been considered and discarded. A human asset couldn't get within 100 meters of Volkov's inner circle. A full-spectrum SIGINT attack, a billion-dollar ghost launched from Cheltenham, had simply bounced off the Residentura's hardened, air-gapped servers like a digital spitball off a battleship. A direct assault was tantamount to an act of war, which left them with this: a plan so audacious that Thorne's own station chief in London, a man named Crichton, who seemed to subsist on a diet of stale digestive biscuits and institutional cynicism, had actually laughed out loud. A dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement when it was first proposed. Then his face had settled into its usual mask of weary resignation, and he had approved it with a single, tired nod. The plan was elegant in its sheer, unadulterated madness. They would use a non-human asset, a creature small enough to slip through the 1-centimeter gap, intelligent enough to follow complex commands, and, most crucially, biologically invisible to the building's electronic security systems, which were calibrated to detect human mass, body heat signatures, and bipedal movement patterns. A creature like Finch. Thorne had spent 4 agonizing months with the Capuchin at a repurposed country estate in the Scottish Highlands called Glen Caelic, a place of perpetual rain and the pervasive smell of wet peat. He wasn't a primatologist. He was a field officer specializing in high-risk infiltration. His job was to break into places and steal things. He had never imagined his primary tool would one day be a 2-kilogram primate with a fondness for grapes and an incorrigible streak of kleptomania involving shiny objects. The training had been an exercise in excruciating patience that had frayed his nerves to the breaking point. They had built a perfect 1-to-1 scale replica of Volkov's office, a multi-million-pound stage set of espionage. They had sourced the same 30-year-old mahogany for the desk, the same worn Moroccan leather for the chair. They even burned Sobrani cigarettes and brewed Lapsang Souchong tea to perfectly replicate the room's unique olfactory signature. Day after day, Thorne had guided Finch through the same routine, using a series of soft clicks and hums from a sub-vocal transmitter pressed against his larynx, a device that turned his thoughts into a language the monkey could understand. 1 click, too short, move forward. A long, low hum. Stop, be still. A rapid, sharp triplet. Retrieve the target. The target was always a red folder. Inside, Finch was trained to retrieve a single sheet of paper using a tool designed by Portendown's most brilliant and possibly deranged minds. A non-metallic polymer tube, no bigger than a pen, with a tacky, gecko-like roller at the end. He would unroll the tube, press the roller against the paper, and the sheet would adhere to it through van der Waals forces. Then he would roll it back up, securing the document inside. The hardest part, Thorne recalled from a particularly bleak Tuesday in Scotland, when Finch had decided to dismantle a replica Fabergé egg instead of retrieving the target, was conditioning him to suppress his natural instincts. Not to be curious, not to touch the gleaming silver letter opener, not to investigate the interesting smell of a discarded pastry in the wastepaper basket, not to screech if a shadow moved unexpectedly. Thorne used a reward of a slice of ripe mango and a punishment of a sharp, unpleasant 15 kilohertz noise transmitted through a tiny receiver surgically implanted behind Finch's ear. A device chillingly referred to in the briefing notes as the sonic goad. He had grown to hate that part of the job. He could see the confusion and betrayal in the monkey's intelligent brown eyes every time the sound made him flinch and cover his ears. But Crichton's words from the initial briefing had been clear, delivered with the flat finality of a death sentence. This isn't a pet, Thorne. It's a key, a biological lockpick. It must be perfectly calibrated, or it's worthless, and worthless things are disposed of. 2 minutes, Anya said, her voice tight, pulling him from his reverie of rain and guilt. Volkov is moving to the comms room, his nightly encrypted call to Moscow Center. Thorne exhaled slowly, the vapor momentarily fogging the ocular lens of the scope. He wiped it clear with a gloved thumb. He could see it now. The light in Volkov's office was on, a warm, yellow rectangle against the cold, blue-black of the embassy's facade. A silhouette passed the window, tall, broad-shouldered, the unmistakable bulk of the old colonel. Then, a faint, heavy thud, just barely audible even to Anya's enhanced microphone. The sound of a steel door closing. The comms room was a Faraday cage within the office, shielded against any form of electronic eavesdropping. While Volkov was in there, he was effectively blind and deaf to what happened in his own office. The clock had started. 11 minutes. Transmitter is active, Thorne said, his throat suddenly dry. He cleared it and swallowed the cold, thin air. Finch, you ready for a walk? He slid the monkey out of the carrier. Finch was already wearing his harness, a feather-light web of woven carbon fiber strands that held a tiny pinhole camera, the Kestrel eye, on his chest, giving Thorne a direct, first-person view of the operation. Thorne did a final check, his fingers moving with practiced, economical efficiency in the dark. Everything was non-metallic, non-reflective, and sterile. He attached the monofilament line to a reinforced loop on the back of the harness. Finch looked up at him, his head cocked, a silent question in his liquid brown eyes. For a fleeting, unprofessional moment, Thorne felt a pang of something he couldn't afford to name. He was about to send this small, living creature into one of the most hostile, electronically monitored environments on Earth. Okay, Anya, it's on you. Paint me a picture. Anya nodded, her eyes fixed on her tablet, which showed a schematic of the building's external sensor grid overlaid on a thermal map. Wind is 2 knots, gusting to 5 from the northeast. No patrols on the east face. The stage is yours. You are clear. Thorne settled the rifle back into his shoulder, the cold seeping through his layers. He lined up the glowing crosshairs not on the window itself, but on the ornate granite scrollwork of the ledge just below it. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate, entering that familiar state of cold, detached focus, where time itself seemed to slow and thicken like syrup. He squeezed the trigger. There was no bang, no crack. Just a soft phut, like a cork being pulled from a vintage bottle of wine, the quiet exhalation of nitrogen under high pressure. The projectile shot across the 60-meter gap, a ghost in the dark. Thorne watched its trajectory through the scope, a tiny mote of carbon fiber arcing through the night. It was perfect. The hook landed on the stone with a faint tink that was utterly lost in the city's ambient hum and clamped on, the magnet engaging with a satisfying thud, visible only as a brief, bright flare on the thermal feed. The line was taut, an almost invisible bridge from their rooftop to the lion's den. Now for the hardest part. He carefully placed Finch on the line, The monkey gripped it instinctively, his long, prehensile tail wrapping around it for balance. He looked back at Thorn, hesitant. This was always the moment of doubt. In training, he'd sometimes refused, chittering in protest, until the hated sonic goad was threatened. There was no room for that here. Thorn pressed the transmitter against his larynx. He sent the first command, the gentle two-part click that meant forward. It's safe. Finch hesitated for another second, a tiny silhouette against the glowing city. Then he began to move. Hand over hand, with a fluid, practiced motion, he shimmied across the monofilament line. On Thorn's tablet, the Kestrel feed flickered to life. The view was shaky, a chaotic jumble of sky and the distant, glowing windows of Vienna. But it was stable enough. He could see the embassy wall rushing closer. The sheer, brutalist stone looked like a mountain range from this perspective, a cliff face of sheer granite. He's halfway, Anya whispered, tracking the tiny, mouse-sized heat signature on her own imager. No sign of detection. Microwave, seismic, acoustic, all green. He's a ghost. Thorn's knuckles were white where he gripped the rifle. He wasn't just the operator anymore. He was the monkey's eyes, his ears, his only guide in a hostile world. He watched the feed intently. The window was coming up fast. The 1 centimeter gap looked impossibly, terrifyingly small. Slow down, he thought, sending the corresponding low hum through the transmitter. Finch's pace slackened. He reached the stone ledge and paused, his little head turning left and right. The camera feed swung wildly. Steady, boy, steady, Thorn muttered, his lips barely moving. He sent the command to move towards the gap. Finch obeyed, creeping along the ledge until he was right beside the opening. For a terrifying moment, he simply sat there, peering into the lamplit warmth of the office. The sounds from Anya's microphone were amplified in Thorn's ear. The gentle hum of electronics, the ticking of a grandfather clock. Thorn could feel his own heart pounding against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the cold silence. This was it. The point of no return. He sent the command, "Enter." Finch flattened himself and squeezed through the gap. It was tight. The camera feed went black for a second as his body blocked the lens, then it cleared. He was inside. The view on the tablet was now a monkey's eye view of a spy master's inner sanctum. It was exactly like the replica at Glen Caeliach, but imbued with a terrifying reality. The large mahogany desk dominated the room, neat and brutally orderly. A single banker's lamp cast a pool of warm, yellow light on a green leather blotter. And there it was. Placed squarely in the center of the blotter, a slim folder made of dark red leather, embossed with the golden, double-headed eagle of the SVR. "Target acquired," Thorn breathed, the words frosting in the air. "Anya, status?" 9 minutes remaining on the call, all clear. Internal sensors show no anomalies. As far as their systems are concerned, that room is empty. Thorn's focus was absolute, tunneled down to the glowing screen and the sub-vocal transmitter at his throat. He had to guide Finch across 20 feet of open floor, up the leg of the desk, and onto the chair, without him touching anything else. The old floorboards might creak. The air might hold unfamiliar scents that could distract him. He sent the sequence of clicks for move forward, low and quiet. On the screen, the room began to move. The plush, threadbare oriental rug slid by underfoot. The leg of the desk loomed like the trunk of a giant redwood. Finch scrambled up it with an easy, silent grace. Then he was on the worn leather of Volkov's chair, peering over the armrest at the surface of the desk. The red ledger was right there, waiting. But next to it, something new. something that hadn't been in the last satellite and human photographs of the office interior. A small porcelain figurine of a wolf, its head cocked as if listening, its painted eyes seeming to glitter in the lamplight. It was an addition, a deviation from the pattern. Volkov must have placed it there tonight. Was it just a sentimental paperweight? Or was it something more? A silent, pressure-sensitive alarm? A trap? Thorne's mind raced through the possibilities, each one worse than the last. There was no way to know. Aborting the mission now meant losing their only chance, perhaps forever. Pressing on could trigger an alarm that would bring the embassy's entire internal security force, 20 armed men from the Zaslan unit, down on this room in seconds. Anya, zoom in on the desk, the figurine, he commanded, his voice a low hiss. What do you see? On her own high-powered scope, Anya focused in, the image stabilizing. It looks like mice and porcelain. 18th century, maybe. I can't see any wires, no obvious trigger mechanism, no heat signature. It's cold as the desk. It looks like just a statue, Alec. But I can't be sure. There was no choice. They had to trust the intelligence, trust the plan. Crichton's voice echoed in his memory from a briefing weeks ago. Hesitation is a luxury we cannot afford, Thorne. In the decisive moment, you act. He sent the command to Finch. Approach the target. The little monkey crept onto the desktop. He moved with a delicacy that was breathtaking, his feet making no sound on the polished wood. He skirted the porcelain wolf, giving it a wide berth. He reached the red ledger. Okay, Finch. Do your thing, Thorne whispered. Retrieve the target. Finch unhooked the polymer tube from his harness. He unrolled it carefully. The tacky, shimmering surface glistened in the lamplight. He pressed it onto the top sheet of paper inside the folder. He held it there for a second, then began to roll it back up. The paper lifted cleanly, peeling away from the sheets beneath it without a sound, and disappeared into the tube. Finch secured the cap with a decisive twist. He had it. He actually had it. A surge of adrenaline and disbelief shot through Thorne, a warmth that had nothing to do with his thermal suit. He has it, he said to Anya, his voice tight with triumph. He has the page. Get him out of there, she urged, her voice taut with urgency. 6 minutes left on the clock. Thorne was about to send the command to retreat when the unthinkable happened. A faint draft, stirred by Finch's own movement, eddied across the desk. A single sheet of paper in the folder, loosened by the removal of the top one, lifted into the air. It fluttered, dancing in the lamplight like a dying moth, before drifting silently, agonizingly, off the edge of the desk. Thorne's blood ran cold. He watched on the Kestrel Eye feed as the paper landed on the floor, half hidden in the deep shadow of the desk. An incomplete theft was as bad as no theft at all. Worse, even. If Volkov returned and saw a single page missing from the middle of a stack, he might not notice for hours, even days. But if he saw a page lying on the floor, he would know his inner sanctum had been breached immediately. The entire building would go into lockdown. They would find the monofilament line. They would know the vector of attack. The flaw in their security would be sealed forever. And Finch was still inside. New problem, Thorne hissed, the words like chips of ice. There's a page on the floor. He has to get it. Alec, the risk is too high. The mission parameters were for 1 page. Pull him out now. That's an order. There's no choice, he snapped, his authority as mission commander overriding hers. He had to devise a new plan, a new set of commands, on the fly. He had never trained Finch for a 2-part retrieval. He didn't even know if the monkey's conditioned mind could process the new instruction. He sent the command for down. Finch scrambled off the desk, He was now on the floor, the precious tube containing the first page still clipped to his harness. The second page was only a few feet away. Forward. Finch crept towards it. Retrieve. Finch cocked his head. The kestrel eye feed tilted quizzically. He looked at the tool on his harness, already occupied, then at the paper on the floor. He seemed confused. This was outside the rigid parameters of his training. He let out a soft, questioning chitter. Thorne could hear it faintly through Anya's parabolic mic, a tiny sound of distress in a world of silence. "He's confused," Anya said, her voice strained. "Volkov's call will be ending soon, Alec. 4 minutes." Thorne closed his eyes for a second, shutting out the wind, the cold. Everything but the problem. How do you explain a new concept to an animal in a language of clicks and hums? You couldn't. He had to rely on the monkey's innate intelligence, on the strange, unspoken bond they had built over months of shared frustration and reward. He sent the command again. Retrieve. But this time he changed the inflection, making the triplet of clicks sharper, more urgent. It was an intonation he had used in training when Finch was willfully refusing to perform a task he knew well. It wasn't a command for a specific action, but a raw, primal command that meant do the thing you are supposed to do, now. On the screen, he saw Finch pause. The monkey looked at the paper, then down at his own empty hands. Thorne could almost see the synaptic spark, the leap of logic. His intelligence, honed by months of problem-solving, made the connection. He couldn't use the tool, so he would use what he had. He scurried forward, snatched the paper with his hand, and, in a moment of pure, startling ingenuity, stuffed it into his mouth. Thorne almost laughed out loud from sheer relief. It was crude. It was messy. The paper would be creased and damp with monkey saliva. But it was off the floor. "He has it," Thorne said, a grin spreading across his face. "He has both pages. Get him out, now." He sent the retreat command. Finch turned and scurried back towards the window. He climbed onto the ledge, the precious cargo secured. He squeezed back through the gap and onto the monofilament line. "He's out," Anya confirmed, tracking his heat signature. "Reel him in, Alec. Fast." Thorne began turning the high-speed winch integrated into the rifle's stock. The line grew taut, and Finch came speeding back towards them, a tiny dark shape against the Vienna skyline. It was then that a light flickered on 2 floors below Volkov's office. A balcony door slid open. A man in the gray uniform of the embassy's internal security stepped out, a cigarette glowing like a firefly in his hand. He stretched, a man named Sergei, on the last hour of a boring shift, enjoying the cold night air. And then his gaze drifted upwards. Thorne froze, his hand clamped on the winch. Sergei's gaze was sweeping the face of the building, a lazy, bored scan. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. But the monofilament line, almost invisible, might catch the light at just the right angle. And Finch, now only 20 meters away, was a moving object in a static landscape. "Anya," Thorne said, his voice dangerously calm. "Distraction. East side. Now." "On it." Anya's fingers flew across her keypad, her movements swift and precise. Seconds later, the piercing Teutonic shriek of a Mercedes car alarm erupted from the street below, on the far side of the embassy. The guard on the balcony flinched, visibly annoyed. He leaned over the railing, cursing softly in Russian, trying to see the source of the commotion. It was the opening Thorne needed. He cranked the winch with all his strength. Finch flew across the remaining distance. Thorne dropped the rifle, reached out, and snatched the monkey and the line out of the air in one smooth, practiced motion. He shoved Finch, harness and all, into the carrier and zipped it shut. "Line is clear," he grunted, activating the remote release on his wrist. Across the street, the magnetized hook disengaged and fell, pulled by a weighted lead into the thick, manicured bushes lining the embassy wall, where it would be all but impossible to find before the morning dew evaporated. The guard on the balcony, having lost interest in the car alarm, turned his gaze back up. He scanned the spot where the line had been moments before. He squinted, perhaps seeing a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, a trick of the light, an after-image on his retina. He shrugged, took one last drag from his cigarette, flicked the butt into the darkness, and went back inside, slamming the door against the cold. "We are compromised," Anya whispered, already packing her equipment with frantic, silent speed. "He may not have seen us, but he saw something. We have to go." They moved like wraiths, stripping the rooftop of any sign they had ever been there. They didn't take the elevator. They took the service stairs, descending into the concrete guts of the building. They emerged into a deserted underground car park, slipped into a nondescript Audi A6 with diplomatic plates, and pulled out into the Vienna traffic. Just another car on a quiet Tuesday night. Neither of them spoke until they were miles away, winding through the labyrinthine streets of the old city. Thorne finally allowed himself to take a full, deep breath that didn't feel like swallowing ice. He reached into the back seat and unzipped the carrier. Finch poked his head out, looking ruffled but unharmed. He opened his mouth, and a small, soggy ball of paper fell out onto the supple leather. Thorne picked it up carefully, along with the polymer tube. He looked at the small creature staring back at him, who seemed to be demanding a grape for his efforts. "Good boy, Finch," he said, his voice hoarse with relief and exhaustion. "You did good." Back in the sterile confines of the safe house, an anonymous apartment near the Prater that smelled of bleach and had never been lived in, the true prize was revealed. Anya, a master of document recovery, worked her magic. She gently unfurled the damp, chewed page and placed it in a low-temperature dehydrator. The page from the tube was pristine. She scanned both documents with a high-resolution scanner, encrypted the files, and sent them hurtling through the digital ether to a secure server in Cheltenham. An hour later, the encrypted satellite phone buzzed, a harsh, insistent sound in the quiet room. It was Crichton. His voice, usually a dry, reedy monotone, was practically buzzing with a rare, predatory excitement. "Thorne, it's solid gold. Pure, unadulterated gold. The first page is Volkov's active asset list for Western Europe. We have names. High-level names in NATO, the BND. We can finally cauterize the wound." "And the second page?" Thorne asked. He was watching Finch, who, having devoured a large bunch of grapes, was now meticulously grooming his tail, utterly oblivious to the geopolitical storm he had just unleashed. There was a pause on the other end of the line, pregnant with significance. "The second page," Crichton said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, "wasn't a list of old assets. It was a proposal, a list of new targets for recruitment. Our people, Thorne. It includes the station chief in Berlin, the deputy director of naval intelligence, and David Eames." Thorne felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. A sudden, icy hollowness opened up in his chest. David Eames, his former partner, presumed dead after a car bomb in Lisbon 3 years ago. An operation that had gone catastrophically wrong, an operation Thorne had led. He still remembered the scent of cordite and burning petrol, the sight of the twisted, flaming wreck. Volkov thought Eames could be turned, or, the more nauseating thought, maybe he had never died. Maybe Lisbon wasn't a mistake. Volkov's ledger has saved us from a decade of pain, Thorne. Crichton continued, his voice hardening back to its usual flinty tone. You and your associate have performed a miracle. The Prime Minister is being briefed as we speak. This is a major victory. Glad we could be of service, Thorne said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. One final piece of housekeeping, Crichton said, his voice now utterly devoid of all emotion. Operation Chimney Sweep is now concluded. All assets and methodologies must be sanitized. You know the protocol. Thorne knew. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a chill far colder than the helm on the Vienna rooftop. Sanitize. The clinical, bloodless euphemism for elimination. Crichton, you can't be serious. The asset is a living, breathing security breach, Thorne. It knows the methodology. It's been inside the SVR Residentura. If the Russians ever got their hands on it, if they studied its behavior, its conditioning, they could reverse engineer our training protocol. They could learn what it responds to. They could learn about you. It's an unacceptable risk.